My name is Helen Hyde, and first of all, I wanted to say that this group does not mean that I am in place of any medical advice. If you have concerns or you're worried about something, please do talk to your midwife or doctor, whoever you're seeing. This group is just for me to share from my experiences, things from the births that I've gone through. I've had 5 babies, pregnant with number 6 right now, and I've done a lot of research because of how rough my first birth was. I felt like it didn't need to be that bad, and did a lot of research after that, and I feel like I would like to share with others the things that I have learned. So now that we have that over with, so my oldest is 7 right now. He will be turning 8 in May. So we got pregnant with our first baby. He was a honeymoon baby. My pregnancy with him was very rough. I had UTIs almost the whole time, bladder infections very, very badly. And he ended up being 6 days overdue. I went into labor the 5th day overdue. So I was 40 weeks and 5 days when labor started. My labor started very slowly, just like contractions that I couldn't sleep through, and they got more and more uncomfortable. So I got up, did a lot of walking around, swaying my hips, and by morning I was very tired because I had slept about 2 hours, and I was in a lot of pain. So before I go further with the story, I want to say something. I went into my first birth extremely naive. I had this idea that my body would know what to do, I would handle it well, I would be completely fine, everything would go good. That's what kind of attitude I had, and I did not prepare myself at all. I didn't take any kind of birth course, I didn't do any kind of educating, I didn't read any birth books, nothing. So I set myself up for failure. I know that it's my own fault, and that's why I am so passionate about helping others know better. So because I had not prepared myself in any kind of a way, I did not know how to breathe so that I wasn't in so much pain. I didn't know to think of it as pressure and not pain. So by 10 o'clock in the morning on the day my labor started, I was in so much pain. I was convinced that it was time to go to the hospital, and our baby was coming now. And being a first-time mom, my midwife suggested for me to just come into the office. They would check and see how far along I was and go from there. So we went into the office, and I was barely in labor. I don't remember even exactly how far dilated I was, but it was not nearly what I thought it would be. I was just barely in labor, not even enough for them to admit me to the hospital. So she asked if I would like a shot of gravel because I had barely slept and I was very tired. I was barely staying awake at this point. And so I got the shot of gravel, and we drove back home, which was almost an hour drive, but that just goes to show you that my labor was just not that far along, because she recommended for us to just go back home. And we went back home, and for the next while I had a contraction, knocked out as soon as the contraction was over, and then I would wake up again when the next contraction started, and then fall right back asleep again as soon as it was over. I guess the gravel really kicked in for me. But we continued like that for a few more hours, and then we went to the hospital at around 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then I was far enough along that they admitted me and labored there. I have always had this feeling of when I get to the hospital, I feel like they're all waiting on me for something to happen, and then I kind of get this feeling of I don't want to be there because I don't want to be an inconvenience to them, which I know not everyone feels that way. A lot of women are very comfortable in the hospital, but for me it wasn't that way. So we got there, it was all going fine at first, and then as things got further along, as the contractions got stronger and closer together, I had all back labor, which I didn't know at the time. I didn't know the difference between back labor and not having back labor. So it was all back labor for me. And for anyone that has had back labor, it's horrible to go through. It's so much worse than having the contractions in your belly. So I had all back labor, and my mistake was that every time I would feel a contraction coming, I would brace myself for the pain that was coming. I would tense up my whole body to try to bear against the pain that was coming. And it just made it so much worse. Now, when I got to, I'm not even sure how far along I was. I feel like a lot of the first birth is very hazy because of how hard it was for me. But they offered I could use the gas, the breathing gas or laughing gas that they give you. They offered if I wanted that because I was not relaxing at all between my contractions. So I used that for a little bit, but I did not like the way it made me feel. It made me feel like I was high or something. I've never been high, but I'm assuming that's what it feels like. And it didn't take the pain away at all, which in my mind I thought it was going to. So I guess it wasn't what I expected, and I had a hard time coping with that. And then by the time I got to 8 centimeters, I completely stalled. I wasn't dilating anymore. I was fully just on the hospital bed. They had the head end of the bed completely reclined, and I was just kind of leaning over it on my knees. And I remember thinking that this is how I'm going to die. This is the end. I'm not going to make it through this. I have never had that feeling before or after, but in that moment, that's how I felt. That's how horrible my first birth was for me. And after sitting at 8 centimeters for 2 hours, nothing was changing. I was having a very, very hard time dealing with everything. And there's so many things that I know now that I would do differently, that I would have done differently, that I think could have made it way better. But anyway, this is just how it went the first time. After sitting at 8 centimeters for 2 hours, they asked if I wanted to get an epidural to see if I would relax enough between the contractions so I could continue to dilate, or if I wanted to, if I wanted to have the epidural to try to avoid getting a C-section. So my plan the whole time was that I absolutely didn't want a C-section, so I agreed I wanted the epidural. And it took probably almost another hour before I got the epidural. It numbed me completely from right above my belly all the way down. I couldn't feel anything. So we sat like that for the next while, just waiting to dilate further. And then once I was fully dilated, I started pushing. And for me, even through the pushing phase, I couldn't feel when I was having contractions. They had to tell me from the monitors that they had on my belly when a contraction was coming, so I knew when to push. And being a first-time mom, not knowing what the feeling of how you're supposed to push, and then being completely numb, I feel like it kind of sets you up for failure. So I was pushing for 40 minutes when he was born, and they didn't say anything at the time, and I didn't notice anything, but later on, going through my birth records, they had noted that he had a slight shoulder dystocia, which is when the shoulder gets stuck after the head comes out. But it must have been all fine because they never said anything to me. And he was born sunny side up, so he was born facing up. They're supposed to be facing your back, which makes the labor so much easier, which that's actually where the back labor comes from, because the back of their head is pushing against your spine, and that's what causes so much back pain. So then after, for the placenta, I had quite a bit of bleeding. It was 600 milliliters. They prefer to keep it at 500 or less. I had about 600, and that was after the Pitocin shot. And they didn't say it was a hemorrhage, just almost. And then after that, everything went fine. Nursing was very well with him. The first little bit was rough because he had a tongue tie, but we had that fixed. And then after that, it was good. And I got pregnant again when he was about 4 or 5 months. So our next one was a year and 2 months after our first. And in that time, I did a lot of research. I felt like it wasn't right how hard it was, and that I felt like I was going to die giving birth. I just felt like there had to be a better way. So I did a lot of research during that time when I was pregnant again. And my second birth actually went way, way better. So I went into labor about 5:30 in the evening, and my contractions were strong. I decided to take a hot bath to see if it was actually labor or if it would go away, and as soon as I got into the hot water, they got way stronger right away, which is an indication that it is labor. So the midwife suggested we should come into the hospital. It was about a 45-minute drive. So we headed into the hospital, got there about 6:30 or 7, and the whole time I felt like I was coping way better. I had a much easier time making it through the contractions. I knew more about how to breathe so that it wasn't pain, more just pressure. And the midwife that I had was amazing. She prayed over me while I was in labor. She had tinctures that I could use while I was in labor. As soon as my contractions kind of stalled, then she gave me those, which helped a lot. And the whole time I felt like I was completely fine. I felt like I could do this. And then all of a sudden I got to the point where I felt like, nope, I can't do this anymore. I want the epidural after all. And my midwife looked at me and she said, you're gonna have your baby before the anesthesiologist gets here to give you the epidural. And that was so encouraging to me. I felt like, wow, I'm almost done, I can do this. So he was born shortly after that. He had about a 7-hour labor, so it was much more doable. The first one was 22 hours. And same thing again after with the bleeding, slight hemorrhage, again 600 milliliters. But overall the birth was so much better. Now I had some, it's interesting to me because with the first I was so completely numb I didn't feel what they call the ring of fire when the head is born. Now with the second one I didn't have an epidural, I didn't have any kind of pain medication, so I could feel everything, and it shocked me how strong that ring of fire feeling is. So that was kind of a surprise, I guess, but besides that everything went really well. I did have stitches with the first, which I did not need for the second. And then our third, we decided to go for a home birth. So she was due when our second was gonna turn 2. So we decided to go with a home birth for her. I had always heard of having a water birth and how that really helps for the pain, and I wanted to try it. It seemed comfortable to me. So we decided to go with a home birth. We had a birth pool rented that we were using, and my contractions started at 6:30 in the morning. Right away I felt like, yep, this is it. They started very strong right from the first contraction, and now after our second I did even more research and even more practicing on relaxing my body because I realized how important that really is. So with our third, my labor started at 6:30. I had my husband and midwife come to our house about 9:30 or 10, and they set up the birth pool, filled it up with nice warm water. Midwife got all of her stuff set up. They have so much stuff there in case you need it. And I remember at 11:30 we joked around that it would probably be a while yet, because in my mind we were going to have the baby during the night because the oldest two were both born during the night, and this was like 11 o'clock in the morning. So, and at that point I still felt really good. I had pressure with the contractions, but I felt very well in between. I was laughing and talking in between. And at, I would say about 12:15, 12:20, I started to feel like, okay, this is really intense, this is starting to hurt. And she was born at, around 12 is when I felt that way, and she was born at 12:20. So it was maybe the last 15 minutes or so where I felt like I was in pain. The rest of the time was amazing. And yes, she was born in the pool. We had an amazing water birth. It was so good. Bleeding was the same again for that one, but again, no tearing at all. With our fourth, so he was born a year and 5 months after our third. And so with him, we had it was a mix-up. So during my pregnancy, he had a very irregular heartbeat. Like his heart would beat, 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 beat. So it was extremely irregular. Like, it would skip for a while and then it would go really quickly, and it was all over the place. That was at 31 weeks. The local hospital decided that we needed to be transferred to a bigger hospital in case they wanted to do a C-section that night. That was at 31 weeks. So we went to a bigger hospital. We ended up staying there for a couple of days so they could do some like a fetal ultrasound on the baby's heart to check if there was problems, if he would need heart surgery after he was born. And after a couple of days, everything was completely normal. There was nothing wrong. They couldn't see any kind of problem what was going on. So we ended up just going back to our midwives again, and everything was completely fine the rest of the pregnancy. So we decided, well, maybe if everything still looked good, we could still have a home birth, which I really wanted because my experience was so much better. And now, I think it was like the last week before I was due, 2 weeks before, his heart rate got irregular again. Just at the second last appointment, it sounded irregular again, just like it had before. So we decided it would be better to be at the hospital just in case he would need heart surgery, or if there was any kind of issues with his heart, we would rather be at the hospital already. So we ended up planning just for a hospital birth. I went into labor in the evening, about 6:30 or so, 6 o'clock, and we went to the hospital. Now with this one, with the fourth one, I had back labor again, which I did not have for 2 and 3. With the fourth one, was again in the hospital and again back labor, and I had so many flashbacks of the first birth. I feel like I panicked, and to me it felt like it was getting so bad right away that I decided I wanted to get an epidural. The anesthesiologist came in right as I was wondering how I was going to make it and asked if I wanted an epidural before he went home for the night, which is pushing and they shouldn't be doing, but anyway, that's for another time. But I agreed, I did want it. With the back labor, I just didn't feel like I could cope, so I got the epidural, and we kind of sat around and waited for several hours, and he was born shortly after 2 in the morning, and he was completely fine. His face was quite bruised, but his heart rate was perfect, and bleeding was again the same thing, about 600 milliliters like before. And we had his heart checked later. His heart was completely fine, so it was just a in pregnancy thing. And then with our youngest now, our baby number 5, he is just over a year now. He was born a year and 11 months after our 4th. Now for him, I was very determined I wanted to have a home birth again because my experience at home was just so much better than in the hospital. I am just so much more comfortable at home than I am in the hospital. So I wanted to be at home. So we planned for a home birth again. His heart, it was amazing the whole time. It was all very good. We had no issues through the pregnancy, so we planned for a home birth. The day I went into labor started at 8:30 in the morning, and for this one I had early labor, prodromal labor, for a few weeks already, where I had contractions for a few hours in the evening and then it would go away. That's very, very discouraging, and I don't wish that on other women. Anyway, when it started at 8:30 this morning, instantly from the first contraction, I knew that this was it. It just felt different. So I just let my husband know that I thought this was it, but he could stay at work a little bit longer until I felt like it was time. And then later on, mid-morning, he came home and set up the birth pool. The midwife came, filled up the birth pool. She set up all of her stuff, and at around, I would say around 11:30 or so, I got into the birth pool again, and I did a lot of things that I wanted to do the way I wanted to do it, and this midwife was very home birth minded. She was willing to just let me do what I wanted to do, and it was all very good. Very much the same as our third birth, the home birth, except that he came out with his hand next to his face. So he was stuck after his head came out. He was stuck there for a while, and I was pushing, and nothing was happening. And so finally the midwife asked if she could check. She could tell I was working very hard and I wasn't getting anywhere. So she just pulled his hand out and he slid right out. He was born. And again, with him, no tearing or anything. My bleeding was so much less that time. So everything was just really, really good. So that has been my birth experiences so far. I'm pregnant with number 6 right now, 17 weeks tomorrow, and definitely planning for another home birth. I'm very excited to share with all of you things that I learned and things that I did differently for my later births.